has come a long way since the birth of cinema, and throughout different movements adopted by different countries, such as the French New Extremity and the slasher becoming its own subgenre by the late 90s, some movies are still categorically agreed upon as being just a bit too much. Whether it be graphic depictions of extreme body horror or unnecessarily long scenes of sexual assault, it can be universally agreed that, even in the modern day and age, certain subjects just are not enjoyable to witness on the big screen. Well, with that in mind, I'm Ellie with What Culture, and let's take a look at 10 horror movies audiences walked out of. Number 10. Cabin Fever. The original Cabin Fever, directed by Eli Roth, is an oddly enjoyable film that exceeded expectations of just being another corny flick about college kids in the middle of nowhere with imminent threat on their doorstep. Not by any stretch are the characters well-rounded or developed intelligently, but the plot itself is relatively interesting and the visual effects do elevate the rewatchability of the film. In the movie, where 5 college kids go to stay at a log cabin in the woods, instead of a masked serial killer stalking them or some corrupt organisation watching their every move, the main antagonist is a flesh-eating disease that kills its victims within a few days of infection. It is jam-packed full of comedy that is extremely dated, and because of this can be uncomfortable at times to watch, but thankfully this subsides as soon as the characters start getting infected. Despite the progression of the group's infections being some of the most entertaining moments within the film, for some audience members in cinemas, this simply was a bit too much to stomach. Number 9. Raw. Her first entry onto this list, Raw is one of Julia Ducournau's best work to date. Released in 2016 and adding to the already pre-existing movement of French New Extremity, Raw was not the most taboo or gory film to enter into this genre. Yet it saw audiences walk out of its screening and even faint. Raw is centered on first-year veterinary student Justine and how she adapts to life as a fresher. After being forced to eat raw meat as a ceremonial rite of passage in her first few days of being at university, lifelong vegetarian Justine begins to get cravings to eat raw meat more frequently. She eats raw beef, chicken, and liver that are in her flatmate's fridge, yet as you can probably imagine, this does not satiate her need for meat. Eventually, her cravings get the better of her despite trying aggressively to fight them, and she finds herself reaching out to her older sister, also a vet med student at the same school. The two of them try to curb their cravings together, but ultimately fail. The scene which made most audience members queasy to the point of leaving involves the two sisters, a wax strip, and a finger. You do the math. Number 8. The Hills Have Eyes. Wes Craven's original 1977 film added nicely to the slasher genre, but in an entirely unique and unexpected way. It follows the same vague plot of a group of individuals, in this case a family heading to California for an anniversary celebration, and their decision to take the scenic route across country instead of sticking to the highway. As is the way in most horror films, this decision ends in misery for all involved upon being stalked and systematically killed off one at a time by a family of inbred and deformed cannibals living in the hills. During the time this film was released, the only overtly violent movie comparable to this Craven hit that had graced cinema screens was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Due to the nature of the violent acts carried out in this film, such as a character being burned alive at the stake, inferred rape, and the graphic death of a dog, it really is no wonder that cinema goers found it difficult to sit through such scenes. Needless to say, the film's 2006 remake was just as gory. Number 7. BRAHMS The Boy 2. Different to the gore and graphic violence of other films in this list, BRAHMS The Boy 2 is agreed by most people who watch it as being a terrible movie. An underwhelming film to accompany its predecessor, this 2020 film was not critically hailed as living up to the unexpected success of its prequel, The Boy. Following young boy Jude and his parents Liza and Sean's relocation to a countryside manor, strange happenings begin to occur upon Jude's discovery of a porcelain doll named BRAHMS. Those familiar with the doll know all too well who he is and the mischief he brings wherever he goes, yet of course the family are unaware of these happenings. Ultimately, the connection Jude has with BRAHMS becomes obsessive and is what leads to the family falling apart. This film was unfortunately a letdown for audiences who expected a direct follow-on and overt connections to The Boy, and many people walked out of its screenings due to severe boredom and disappointment. Number 6. Irreversible. French New Extremity film Irreversible is one that you never forget watching, and not necessarily for a good reason. The film's structure plays out in reverse chronological order, and because of this, it's not always clear what's going on. Unfortunately, this film is mostly known for its graphic rape scene that defines the entire plot, which ultimately is what created its notoriety status in the French New Extremity movement. Both the rape scene itself and the consequential beating scenes are incredibly graphic and difficult for even the most seasoned torture porn horror fan to stomach. Not only was its depiction of attitudes towards women controversial, but this in itself was enough for many female audience members to up and leave. Despite not being the most tasteful of subject matters for a film, it certainly deserves to be hailed as pioneering in the French New Extremity movement, as it certainly created discourse surrounding the depiction of rape on screen. If you want something to be discomforted by, give it a watch, and more importantly, see if you can make it to the end. Number 5. Bite. 2015's Bite was received differently by various audiences across the US and Canada, and more notably came under fire from critics who found the director's pride in causing audience members to pass out and vomit in the auditorium not only discomforting, but also strangely sadistic. The film follows Casey, a woman who is soon to be wed and has gone to Costa Rica with her bridal entourage for a bachelorette party. After being bitten by a seemingly harmless insect, she begins to slowly mutate and change into something very far from human upon returning home. Her mutations make her increasingly more volatile, and not before long this begins to manifest in the form of killing members of the bridal party. A strange film from start to finish, Bite now seemingly holds the notoriety of having made audience members pass out and spew their guts, although why this is seems to remain a mystery when comparing it to other movies on this list. Number 4. The Exorcist. A classic like no other, The Exorcist is renowned for being one of the horrors of all horror, and still to this day is able to evoke fear in its audiences the same way it did on the day of its release in 1973. Admittedly, horror has changed and become more outlandish than ever since this film first hit the big screens, and may even appear tame to some in comparison to the likes of others on this list, such as TITANE. Yet at the time when arguably the scariest films to be seen by Western audiences would have been the likes of Psycho or Rosemary's Baby, it's no wonder that people walked out of screenings of this masterpiece. Full of biblical horror and possession, the film has some moments of true gore and special effects which may just have been too much for some to stomach. From the vomit-filled makeup of young girl Reagan all the way to the death of biblical men and a demon seemingly winning the battle, those who walked out of this movie can be empathized with ever so slightly. Number 3. Titane. Julia Ducournau's latest addition to the horror genre, Titane, runs in a similar vein to her previous work, Raw, and explores the subgenre of body horror. It truly is no surprise that audiences walked out of this film, despite how crazily brilliant it was. How this film was marketed as the story of a girl who has a titanium plate fitted in her head after being in a car accident, and not as a woman who has sex with a car and then impersonates a young boy to escape her murderous past whilst growing a baby car hybrid inside of her, is beyond me. Its plot is wonderful yet truly wacky, and the point at which most audience members walked out on comes in the form of a self-abortion scene. After realising that she's pregnant, Alexia attempts to perform an abortion on herself using the chopstick that she utilises as a hair wrap, and also a murder weapon. The soundscape for this particular scene is jarring enough, with squelches and thumps galore, but what really takes the biscuit is the acting of Roussel, who really sells the look of a woman desperately performing an abortion on herself. Number 2. Jason X. Jason X is one of the final installments to the Friday the 13th franchise, and is often lambasted as the worst of these films. In this 2001 sci-fi horror flick, serial killer Jason Voorhees goes to space. Yep, you heard that right, space. This film lacks any true plot form, and was a huge letdown for many Friday the 13th fans who had already grown tired of the franchise, yet were promised a fresh film to breathe new life into the infamous serial killer's story. At best, the 92-minute runtime allows for a strange and gimmicky fan service-filled plot to fall way below what was promised upon the film title's release. Fans who came to watch the franchise's 10th installment were understandably disappointed in the film as a whole, but more importantly, many felt as though their once favourite serial killer had been reduced to nothing more than another cash grab. Also seen with the likes of the Nightmare on Elm Street and Halloween franchises, all of which had fantastic villains. Number 1. I Spit on Your Grave. Yet another rape revenge film on this list. I Spit on Your Grave is one of the first films of this nature, and because of this was met with an aggressive amount of resistance upon its release. After watching this movie, it is understandable to see why audiences would have taken issue with it and not been able to sit through it in its entirety. After getting to know protagonist Jennifer and understand her life as an author, it becomes a difficult task to witness her being raped twice by the same group of men. However, her response to this is nothing short of entertaining to watch and root for her murderous antics as a form of justice. Her ability to entice the men in with the same body they abused and then use that against them just goes to prove Jennifer's own bravery, and in some respect is the most impressive part of the film. It is not shocking in any capacity that audiences walked out of this film when it was released in cinemas, as both the rape and murder scenes are astoundingly difficult to stomach, but it certainly is worth a watch if you want a tough evening task. And that concludes our list. If you think we missed any, then do let us know in the comments below, and while you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe and tap that notification bell. Also head over to Twitter and follow us there, and I can be found across various social medias just by searching Ellie Littlechild. I've been Ellie with What Culture. I hope you have a magical day, and I'll see you real soon.